Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for this segment, we have Steve Kemmerling, CEO of CRB Monitor, to discuss investment opportunities in cannabis-related companies and how CRB Monitor helps financial institutions and other companies take advantage of these opportunities. Steve, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be on.
All right, you got it. And tell us about CRB Monitor. What is your primary business and what types of companies do you work with?
Yeah, thanks again for letting us chat today. I just want to say we're excited to be working with Nasdaq. We also launched the Nasdaq CRB Monitor Global Index just a month or so ago. Won't delve right into that. Before we talk about the index, we talk about our company. Basically, CRB Monitor is the only corporate intelligence database focused on the cannabis industry. I was previously a corporate investment banker, heavy user of various databases like Capital IQ and SNL Financial and Bloomberg, et cetera, and didn't see the depth or breadth of information on the cannabis industry that I was used to as an investment banker. So I basically started building CRB Monitor ourselves. We're uniquely positioned in that we track all of the private licensed entities in the U.S. and Canada. There's about 50,000 direct marijuana-related businesses in the U.S. and Canada that we're tracking, including license detail and ownership. And we're also tracking about 1,400 publicly traded cannabis-related businesses globally. Ultimately, our clients are typically large, sophisticated financial institutions. We have 5 of the 6 largest custodial banks in the world as clients. They represent over 130 trillion in assets under custody. We work with about half of the largest prime brokers, which service roughly half of the hedge funds in the US, if not world. And then we have a number of commercial banks, large commercial banks as clients, which have over 3 trillion in assets. So largely, trying to centralize data on the cannabis industry, package it in a way that is ultimately useful for large financial institutions, investment banks, broker-dealers, et cetera, to make more informed decisions.
Walk us through your database and methodology. How do you source and categorize your data, and how are your customers using it?
Yeah, it's a combination of good old data wrangling. At the state level license in the U.S. and Canada, CRB Monitor goes out to identify basically all of what we call license authorities. These are all the state agencies that oversee the licensing and regulation of marijuana businesses. Some states have 1, other states like California have 2, 3, or 4. So basically, from the licensed entity level, we're going out identifying these licensing agencies, using a combination of human and technology to scrape, not just scrape, but categorize, deduplicate, cross-link, normalize, standardize a lot of information from hundreds of sources into one clean, curated database. Again, that's about 50,000 plus of these direct marijuana-related businesses, private entities in the U.S. On the flip side, on the publicly traded global cannabis market, where we have multiple tools to monitor and look across tens of millions of securities filings, regulatory filings, investor presentations, investor transcripts to identify relevant potential cannabis companies for inclusion. But then our research team will manually review each company to understand where they fall within the cannabis ecosystem, the scope or extent to which they're working in the cannabis industry, so we can then accurately classify, kind of risk tier each of the companies. So it is, again, it's a unique combination of both publicly traded cannabis companies globally, as well as currently US and Canada coverage of all of the licensed entity levels. So we're putting that into a centralized database, a website that our clients can log into, review. We also do data feeds to clients depending on their own use cases and needs and parameters. We're also publishing, weekly and monthly newsletters, analysis, analytics, insights, et cetera.
All right. And Steve, we're seeing significant growth, I should say, in cannabis-related businesses. How is that impacting your business and investment opportunities in CRBs in general? And how are you helping financial institutions and other companies take advantage of these opportunities?
Yeah, that's kind of what it's interesting and exciting to me as an entrepreneur about this industry, right? So I hate to say once in a lifetime, it's kind of a cliche, but once in my lifetime, other than maybe crypto, is there a brand new industry that comes about? So the cannabis industry in the US and Canada, or really North America, has been growing at about 20 to 30% compound annual growth year over year. That's roughly measured by retail sales. So in the US and Canada, that's driven by, obviously, Canada federally legalized cannabis in 2018. The US continues to legalize on a state-by-state basis. We're also tracking about 30 other countries, 30 plus countries that are in various stages of legalization of cannabis. So there's just a natural level of growth that we expect to continue to grow at 20 to 30% per year, for the next 5 to 10 years on a global basis. U.S. growth will probably slow down given that we're starting to reach a maturity level. But ultimately, what all this means is, it's a new industry that needs equity capital, needs debt capital, has some exposure to the public markets in terms of IPOs and capital raising. But given kind of this ongoing federal versus state legal dichotomy that marijuana faces in the U.S., there's still a lot of constraints, kind of legal constraints, regulatory constraints, compliance restraints put on cannabis-related entities in the U.S. and frankly internationally, where a lot of the demand for institutional data is still somewhat constrained. But we since I started this company 7 years ago, we're 10 times bigger from institutional demand. A lot of demand is currently driven, and the way we help these large financial institutions today is largely around compliance related items. So if they're banking cannabis or not banking cannabis, from literally depository accounts, or thinking about lending, or thinking about facilitating primary or secondary trading in securities, a lot of what we're helping to do is simply help, interestingly, some of the largest financial institutions in the world wrap their head around, what does cannabis mean? It's just, again, it's a brand new industry. So a lot of the senior bankers, compliance officers, investment bankers literally just don't have an understanding of what this term cannabis means. What does it include? What does it not include? So that's a lot of our value add, is just definitionally what are cannabis companies. Then in addition to that, obviously we have a database of all of the relevant cannabis companies that meets these definitions. So today it's mainly used as a compliance tool. It helps, again, these institutions understand compliance, but increasingly, larger and larger banks, call it regulated depository institutions, are getting into depository relationships, lending relationships, and they're also starting to get into investment banking little by little.
Right. And so, Steve, I would imagine on the flip side that there are risks associated. What are some of them, and how does your data help these managers, banks, financial institutions manage these types of risks?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of institutions are still completing or writing their cannabis-related policies. So it starts with the definitions, and then kind of the next step after they finish their cannabis policy creation is identification of unknown cannabis exposure. Again, whether that's on the banking side, banking relationships, lending relationships, loans that maybe they have to CRBs that they weren't aware of, or on the primary and secondary trading of securities. There are not just US laws that our clients need to be aware of, but international drug trade treaties, or the UK's Proceeds of Crime Act, that influence whether a given, let's say, broker-dealer or prime broker or custodial bank will be able to knowingly move. US marijuana is kind of a no-no from UK securities perspective, but maybe Canadian medical marijuana is okay, or hemp or CBD. So really it's helping institutions identify current risks such that they can then, as the next step, say, okay, now we ring-fenced out what we are unable to do given current internal policies or external legal considerations, but here's what we are willing to do in the cannabis space.
Right.
So we're
right. So it sounds like from the way you help them make investment decisions and how you help them manage those risks really is helping to identify the players that are appropriate for their portfolios. So Steve, in the last minute here, let's talk about the relationship with Nasdaq. You touched on that at the top. You recently launched the Nasdaq CRB Monitor Global Cannabis Index. Can you tell us more about the index and your collaboration with Nasdaq?
Yeah, it's super exciting, at least to me. As a quick context, I used to be an investment banker at Keefe Bretton Woods, or KBW, and as you and listeners might be aware, there's a KBW Nasdaq Bank Index. So that was kind of always one of my dreams. So we were lucky enough to have the subject matter expertise such that Nasdaq approached CRB Monitor when they were thinking about developing a cannabis index. So with myself, my head of research, Jim Francis, who's a CFA, 30 plus years investment management, he previously ran a cannabis ETF. We were able to come up with an index that met Nasdaq's own parameters, again, within the guise of what's okay, what's not okay, to basically summarize it, as well as line up an ETF, a new ETF fund that's going to be launching in February, scheduled to be launched in February, that uses the subject matter expertise, rules, inclusion criteria, as well as weighting of cannabis-related businesses. That is all based on CRB Monitor's, nearly a decade of experience in analyzing this industry. So it's going to be the first, I would call, blue chip, kind of top tier cannabis-focused index in the world.
And finally, Steve, let's talk about 2022 in the last minute here. What do you have in store, and how do you envision the demand for cannabis-related information to evolve with retail and institutional investors?
Yeah, quite simply, we continue to see more large institutions, really institutions of all size, we'll say wake up to the fact that cannabis is significant, it's not going anywhere, represents both a risk and opportunity. So I continue to expect to work with most institutions identifying the risk and creating their cannabis policies, while I also expect to potentially work on additional cannabis indices with Nasdaq, other financial products. Maybe there's more ETFs in line with us at Nasdaq and some of our large ETF clients. And that's on the publicly traded side. On this private database of all the private MRBs, we're looking to expand outside the US and Canada coverage. So worldwide global cannabis coverage, hemp coverage, what we call ancillary or tier 2 cannabis companies. So, if this were alcohol, I'd say we're like in the 1930s. There's still a lot of room ahead of us for expansion of the data, as well as increasing institutional demand for the information to make more informed investment decisions.
All right, Steve, we appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thank you.